Welcome to Everything All Right, where the most amazing authors speak about the best books. And my guest today is the fabulously talented Essie Fox, and we're celebrating the launch of her paperback of her latest novel, The Fascination. Welcome, Essie.
Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you today, Ellen.
Thank you for joining us. Yes, so The Fascination is out in paperback as a hardback. It was really an astounding success and went straight, I believe, in its first week of publication into the Sunday Times bestseller list. So congratulations to that.
Thank you.
And there might still be some really strange people, weirdos out there who have not read The Fascination yet. So would you like to tell us what the book is about, please?
Yes, it's quite a roller coaster of a ride. It's based in the Victorian era, and I suppose a lot of people have called it a Victorian Gothic, and it does have elements of darkness in it, but also, I hope, lots of light and colour and joy. So it's quite a contradiction of things like that, but it's basically about people who are different, whether they're socially excluded from society or physically different, who in the Victorian era would have been called by the word which we really don't like to use now, but they would call them freaks. And so think the Greatest Showman and the TV series, if anybody's seen it, called Carnivale. And it's those sort of characters, and it's how they're excluded from society, but find each other and manage to discover a sort of a family and love and acceptance within themselves and respect, really. It's about respect and acceptance. And in the middle of all this, it's sort of based in the rural fairgrounds along the Thames, which used to be very popular, with boats coming up and down the Thames with goods and things like that. And not a fairground that would have sort of like bumper rides and things like that we might imagine now, but affairs that would have lots of entertainments anyway, with booths showing different things like waxworks, maybe showing little dramas with waxworks, or shows of people acting, or maybe a strong man, which I have in my book, who's has his big hammer and he's banging down the gong to see how very high the weight can go up the ladder, and challenging people to see if they can do it as well. And I also have a man who sells a miracle elixir, and it's not really a miracle at all. He calls it a cure-all for every ill known to man, and he uses his twin daughters, in his act, and his daughters are identically twinned at birth, but one of them stops growing at the age of 5. So she's technically, I suppose, a midget for whatever reason. You have to read the book to find out why she didn't grow. But her other sister grows up to be a natural adult height. And because they look identical, but they're different in their sizes, this makes them in themselves something of a draw that the people come along, because it's a wonder, as it were. And so they are two of the characters who play a very big part in the novel. And then there's another character called Theo, who is born into an aristocratic family, but his mother wasn't married, so he's a bastard. And his grandfather brings him up, with his mother having died in childbirth. And he comes to a point in his life when his grandfather remarries and produces another heir. And so he finds that he's thrown out of home. He travels up to London, becomes involved in an anatomy museum, and that's where he meets somebody who introduces him to the girls, and then they all become involved in the theatres of London, the pantomimes. And so it has a lot of glamour of the pantomimes, but also the gritty underside of London in the Victorian era. And I try to show how the two melded together, perhaps more so than we would imagine. So basically, yes, that's a very long-winded way
in
of
a
going
nutshell,
about saying what it's all
in
about.
in a big nutshell, what The Fascination is about. But it's such a pardon sort of the doubling of words. It is such a fascinating story with such a strong theme. And I wonder, was there really a pair of twins? Because of twins in literature are such a such a seductive idea, and I love the image of them being identical but one not growing. It's very Salman Rushdie, and you could almost imagine this in Midnight's Children and an idea like that.
Those particular, I didn't base those two on any real characters, although there were some very famous twins but usually Siamese in the Victorian era. So you had Chang and Eng, who came over and toured around the world and became very famous. Two men brothers who again were identical, but they were joined at the breast by a very thick band of flesh, which it's quite sad to imagine really that in the present day, had they been born now, it would have been very easy to separate them because none of their organs were co-joined. There would have been some blood vessels running through that joined them, but that would have been all. And unfortunately, or perhaps they might think, fortunately, because they actually became very famous and made a lot of money. They both married, they lived quite happy lives, they had children. The mind boggles to think, what
Would you
childhood
imagine?
was like. But, they seem to manage. And but the sad thing is that when one of them died very suddenly, the other one died soon afterwards because of sepsis. So,
Yes.
tragically, they were born together, co-joined, and they died together, co-joined.
Yes.
So they were a very famous pair of twins. But really, when I was thinking about little Tilly, Matilda, who becomes, so my very small sister becomes a great success in the pantomimes. In London, she plays the Fairy Queen. I mean, she's perfect for that because she's beautiful, she's tiny, she's symmetrically formed. There's a big thing about that in all of the posters about her. And I did use real posters that were based on actual midgets of the era, because again, a little bit like Siamese twins, there were lots of shows including midgets. And I was quite astounded that there could have been so many of them to be toured around. I mean, one of the shows had about 20 midgets in it. They used to put on little shows about the marriage of the midgets and things like that, and they would be
Yeah.
a choir and they would sing. But I suppose, again, with modern medicine today, if children, it's very obvious if a child isn't growing beyond a certain age in the way they should be. And sometimes they need hormone growth replacement therapy. And I knew somebody at school that was very, very small, didn't grow at all from the age of about 8 or 9. And he went on to have some, growth hormone treatment and shot up after that. But without that, he wouldn't have grown. And
No, no,
so I
and of course the
suppose there would have
theatre.
been more small people around.
Yes, and of
Again,
course
because
theatres
there weren't
offered
these
them.
therapists.
Yeah, theatres offered them a living, where elsewhere they would have been outcast and perhaps sort of
Yeah. And that's a big thing
starved
that
and
I
died.
sort of, yeah, that's a big thing I wanted to address in the book, although it seems so cruel that people would be on stage simply because they were different and as a show that people would go along and gawp at them, as it were. But on the other hand, with no social security and very often with their families throwing them out when they were children, and people had very strange ideas about what if somebody looked different, that there might be something wrong with them, or that the devil had cursed them or something like that. And so if they were lucky enough to meet a manager or a showman who looked after them, then they could live a life that was safe. They wouldn't be on the
Yes,
street begging. They wouldn't be being beaten up or abused. Of course, they still were abused very often on the stage by people laughing and throwing things at them, whatever. But at least when they were off the stage, they had a bed at night to sleep in, they had food, they had money, they were
yes,
protected. But I'm not saying it was, a wonderful way to exist. I'm sure it wasn't. And I often think about the Elephant Man and how tragic his life was. But it's I have another character who is based on a real character who is very hirsute. And so he is toured around as being a wolf man, or what they would call a dog-faced boy. And he's based on a real character who was a Russian. And he basically, Fedor Jevdichu, his name was, and he was toured around. And, it was said that he was a throwback. He couldn't speak. He could only howl like a dog. In fact, he was incredibly well educated and could speak several languages. But he had to go through with this persona on the
yes,
stage.
yeah, all about show. So,
Mm.
but you have written other novels already that sort of link the Victorian time and the darker undercurrents. This is really how you forged your voice. How did you
Mm.
discover that period to be yours?
I think I've always loved Victorian novels, and I think it stems back to Probably Thomas Hardy to begin with at school, studying Thomas Hardy, and then going to university and studying English literature. And I really did enjoy the Victorian module so much. It was always a pleasure to read the Victorian sensation novels, a lot of which that we read at the time. And I don't know why I found something so much more of a draw in those, but I did. And I always enjoyed them. And then from that point on, if there was any contemporary neo-Victorian books coming out, I would scan the Sunday papers for the book reviews. And if there was a book coming out that had a Victorian theme to it, I'd just be out to buy it straight away. And that's how I discovered people like, you know, Sarah Waters early on. And just used to rush out and buy any of them and just devour them. So I think I really loved that aspect of the Victorian way that the Victorians would tell a story. Very much, you know, even the more literary works would always have a very, very strong plot to follow through the story. And I do quite like telling stories myself in that way. I also liked, and I suppose it was due to the conflict of religion, really, the essence of good and bad. I quite liked looking into the darkness of things as well as the light. I do find that very interesting, those aspects of humanity which we see so much of still, and we, you know, humans can do glorious things, you know, like create the chapel in the ceiling in the 16th chapel, you know, what is it called in the Vatican, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or do, you know, glorious poetry that's so beautiful it moves you to tears. And then you can have people, you know, warmongers and people that just want fame and glory for whatever reason whatsoever. And it makes no sense when you think that, you know, in 100 years they're gone.
Yeah.
But so I do find those contradictions in humanity very interesting, and I do like to explore those.
And of
And
course,
I
it gets
think,
especially interesting when actually they both meet in the same character, you know, when you have that conflict.
yeah.
And especially in the Victorian age, that was so prim and proper. And then in the same time, there's sort of this fascination for the darkness. So do you still need a lot of research, or do you have your world set now? What is it like for
I
you?
always do lots of research, yes, because I always, although my books are mostly based in the Victorian era, there is one that becomes more Edwardian because I wanted to write about the very earliest silent films. And but even though they're all set within that, you know, that 19th century framework on the whole, they all have completely different themes. And I do like to research a book really thoroughly. So I find the research really good fun and so interesting. And I think when I first started writing, I did think to myself, well, at the end of this, if this book doesn't find an agent or a publisher, at least I've really enjoyed. It's like going back to university and studying again, and actually studying rather than just going to parties all the time, actually, you know, doing some proper work and feeling very fulfilled by it. And so, and at the end of each book, I feel it's almost as if I've done quite a detailed course in that subject. So I would say my second novel, Elijah's Mermaid, is very much based in the demi-monde of London, the music halls and the decadence and dissipation that would be going on, but also about the worlds of art and literature and that sort of elevated world in Victorian society, and again, how the two clash and meet. And that was really interesting, looking into all the sorts of books that were published, and also looking into, you know, the underworld of London. That's when I really got into that. That was very gritty. And then another book, The Goddess and the Thief, which I based in Windsor, which is where I live, a great part of it. But I also, that one came about very accidentally, actually, because when I decided I wanted to write a book that was based in Windsor, I was doing some research about Victorian Windsor, and I somehow on Google, good old Google, it came up the Koh-i-Noor diamond. I don't know why. I looked into the Koh-i-Noor diamond a little bit more and discovered that it had been brought to this country after the end of the Anglo-Sikh Wars, when, you know, we, the empire, took over India, and later on, northern India became Pakistan. But then Lahore was in northern India, and the Kohinoor diamond was brought back here as ransom, and so was the young Maharaja Dulip Singh, who was at that point just a boy. So he was brought back to England, sort of like ransom, really, and as a gift, as it were, for Queen Victoria. And she and he got on famously. And it's really a book that delves into the rights or wrongs of colonialism, but also the myths and the legends that surrounded the Kohinoor diamond, which were absolutely fascinating to look into. So I made a quite supernatural, dark novel that questioned lots of things that went on politically, socially, and spiritually. And that was great. That was a really interesting book to write, actually. I really did enjoy that.
It's a very
So
sophisticated novel, yes. I loved how you sort of interwove sort of her sessions. I mean, I don't want to give too much away, but there are many themes sort of running alongside.
yes, well, spiritually,
And
the whole thing about yes, spirit seances as well,
yes,
because
yeah, exactly. And in the beginning, you think she's
that
doing
was so
something completely
interesting.
else.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, it's so interesting because I although I've got a very, I mean, I've completely imagined a seance that I have going on at Windsor Castle. In reality, it was just a gift because, again, I thought, I really do need to research this and try and get some bones of reality in it. So did Queen Victoria ever meet any spiritualist seances or go to spiritualist seances? And she did have mediums going to the castle sort of under cover of the night secretly. And she wanted to contact Prince, Albert when he died. She desperately wanted to get in touch with him. And so I've linked all that, and then I have, yes, I won't go into how I've linked that with the Kohinoor diamond, but it does all link together.
You can imagine that, yes. And I mean, yeah. So in the beginning, you said in the beginning when you got into writing, you were fascinated by the Victorian novels. So how else do you get into writing? What drove you?
Right. Well, I just wish it had driven me a bit earlier. So if anybody's watching, listening to this who is not yet writing, but is tempted to write and just hasn't quite got the nerve or feels that maybe, the time's not quite right or they're a little bit worried, don't worry. Just plunge into it and see what happens, because I always wanted to write. Since I was a very little girl, I've told stories to myself in my head. So going to bed at night, I would sort of have a running, almost, like a serial going on. Sometimes I suppose I had a lot of fan fiction going on in my head at that time. So I might see films or watch something on television. I was very, very affected by things like The Singing Ringing Tree, which I don't know if anybody remembers. I'm probably a lot older than, and it was basically a sort of East European, very dark fairy tale that was on TV in the 60s and 70s. And I watched it on a black and white TV, which made it seem even more noirish. I was quite shocked recently when I actually bought a DVD of it. I saw one for sale and thought, oh, I really want to see that again. And how lurid the color was, because it was filmed in color, but we watched it on a black and white TV, so just assumed it was black and white. But things like that, I would sort of, it was, as I said, it was terribly dark, but I love fairy tales, and fairy tales are very dark anyway. And then I would sort of spin off in my mind characters and other stories that led off from the basis of what I'd already read or watched. And when I left university, I remember being at home in the summer holidays the year I left university and thinking, I really want to write a novel. So I would have been then, what, 21? But just not having the confidence to actually even start. So I had all the ideas, and over the years, I would think about it again and maybe start scribbling in a pad. But I'm somebody that edits as they go a lot. So writing in freehand, by the time I'd finished one page and then looked back to see what I'd written, and there's so many crossings out and scribbles that I couldn't even read what I'd written. And I thought, it was just impossible. And I think another thing that really helped me write was using a computer rather than a typewriter. I can type, but I mean, it's so easy. We have it, I think, maybe that's one reason why there are so many writers now. It's because we have the tool that makes it so possible for us to do it. Whatever word program you use, I use Microsoft Word, but lots of people use different things, don't they? But it just makes it possible. It makes it accessible to actually do what we're doing, particularly if you write in a certain way. I know some people do still write freehand. What do you do?
Well, I sort of write on a PC, of course, but I realize that when I write freehand, that my thoughts flow differently. There is
Yes,
some
they do.
magic connection between the brain and the hand. But
Yeah.
when you then started to write and you had finished that first novel with which you had fun, which is so
Mm.
important, I think it transpires in your writing. So how did you then find your first agent?
Well, yeah, well, what I actually basically did, I didn't really finish before, and I'll just quickly explain that when I got to a certain age, when I had a daughter, my daughter left home. I had been working all that time, but actually in artwork, illustration. And when my daughter went to university, I suddenly thought again, I really want to write. You know, am I ever going to do it, or am I just going to think about it and never do it? And I was sitting in the garden around that time, and I saw an advert in the newspaper for the Open University. And at that time, and I'm going back to about 2009, the Open University were doing a creative writing course, excuse the noise. And sorry about that. My husband's just come in. And this was a 3-month creative writing course for postgrads. And I thought, I'm going to do this, you know, just 3 months. And so I did. And halfway through that, I started to write my first novel. And that first novel, I would say probably a year later was completed. And probably, you know, the first draft done in about 4 months. But I'm somebody that then goes over and over and over until I'm really happy that I can just read through without stopping or doubting, you know, that something's flowing. I'm sure it's not perfect, but I try to make it as perfect as I can. And then in those days, I had to go out and buy a physical copy of the Writers and Artists Yearbook, which you can now get online, of course. I didn't know any other writers. You know, everything has opened up so much more with social media and being able to meet people that way and to find out, get advice about things that way and ask each other, which is immensely, you know, it's a huge development, really. I just didn't know anybody. So I got this Writers and Artists Yearbook, went through it, looked for who might be suitable for my book, and just sort of printed out 4 copies of my first 30 pages and sent them off to 4 agents. And very luckily, one of them, I had a phone call a few days later from one of them wanting to meet. I still
Fabulous.
didn't realize at that time that they wanted to sign me. I was so naive. I remember going up to Camden where their offices were and having a meeting. And at the end of the meeting, I felt it was more like a job interview. You know, I felt I'd be going home and then they'd get in touch with me later and tell me whether or not I'd got the job. And basically, I was about to leave and she said, well, would you like to join the agency? And I just couldn't believe it.
That's
So
fantastic.
that
Fantastic.
yeah, I mean, it is. And it did sort of all happen very easily for me at that point and very quickly. But I do want to stress that publishing is a hard road to travel. You know, you have wonderful, sometimes things like that, which happen very easily and quickly, and you think, great, fine, I've done it. But, you know, it's very up and down,
It's
the
a
whole thing.
marathon. It's a
Yeah,
marathon and not a sprint, definitely. So I
definitely.
see this sort of lovely bouncy chair you're sitting on. Is that your writing must? Is that do you start your writing day with a bounce on the chair there?
Oh, not really, no.
But it looks inflatable. What is it? I'm
It's a
fascinated.
very big cushion.
Okay, I love the pattern in
Yeah.
any case. It's almost sort
Yeah.
of almost paisley inspiring. So what would be your
Yeah.
top tip then to any nascent novelist? Really have confidence, get your bum on your seat and start writing.
Yeah, yeah, because that's my greatest regret in life, and it really is, like, you know, professionally, I should say, that I didn't start earlier. I had the ideas, I had the
Mhm.
inspiration, um, I just didn't quite have the confidence. And
Yes, that's very valid.
but what I did do in all of those years, and what I've always done, is read. And not just read sort of Victorian novels, although, as I said before, that I would rush out and buy them. but I've always read very widely and all genres. And I think that's really important. I think that every book you read, if it's a well-written book, you will gain something from it, something will stick.
Yeah.
And also, I just can't believe it when some people say, you know, I want to write a novel, I've got this idea for a novel, but no, I never read, I don't read books. And I think that's so weird. How do you think, you know, because you learn about the structure, you learn about how to present things.
Yes.
And there is a way of doing it, which is, you know, some people just innately know and just do it. But I think the more you read, the more you will learn how to do it.
Definitely. So what is next for you, Essie?
Well, I've got a few things in the pipeline. The Fascination, the paperback's just out, and that was fun because I did some illustrations for that, which was like going back to my old profession. And I really enjoyed that, actually. It did make me think maybe now I need a little bit more balance. Maybe I should go back to doing some painting again. But anyway, I think writing wins. Definitely, you know, when I get up in the morning, that's what I want to do. So I have got another book coming out next year, which will be slightly different. And it's not a Victorian. It's still historical. It's historical. I do like my history. So basically, it's got lots of things I love in it. It's got Venice. It's set in Venice. It's set in the very early 1800s. So it's in the Georgian era. And it's a crime thriller, but it's very Gothic. And the main protagonist is Lord Byron. I don't know why I'm laughing when I say that.
I mean, what is not to like, Essie? It sounds fantastic. Do you have is there a title already?
Yes, it's called Dangerous, which is obviously alluding to the mad, bad, and dangerous to no aspect of Byron.
Yes.
And it's a lot of it's based on truth. I mean, I have gone off on a sort of wild goose chase in my own mind at one point, but it's based on the fact that when Byron, after 3 years after he'd rented the Villa Diodati at Lake Geneva, on that dark and stormy night when Mary Shelley first conceived Frankenstein, when she was staying with him, he had a private doctor called Dr. Polidori, who was actually a very young man. And when Mary, you know, started writing Frankenstein, it was because Byron had come up with the idea that he wanted them all, everybody, it was wet, they couldn't go out, it was miserable weather. They'd been reading a German I can't say this word, but I'll just call it a German book of ghost stories. And I think it's phantasmagoria is the word that was used. And he said, let's all have a competition. You know, we'll sit by the fire, we'll drink opium, we'll get our imaginations going. And she came up with Frankenstein when, of course, you know, that's the beginning of that wonderful story. And Byron started to write a story about a vampire. But he only wrote about one page, and then he decided, oh, this is rubbish. I'm not really interested in vampires. And he screwed it up and threw it on the floor. His doctor, Dr. Polidori, picked it up. Dr. Polidori had great literary aspirations. And 3 years later, he basically took the sort of first page of this story and rewrote it, and then carried on and turned it into a novella, which was published by a rather roguish English publisher who put it out. It's called The Vampire, and it's one of our very earliest classic vampire stories. But instead of writing at that point by Polidori on the cover, they wrote by Lord Byron, knowing that, I mean, Polidori had been honest and said he'd based it on Byron's scrap. It was a fragment. It was called The Fragment. But basically, poor Polidori, you know, he was devastated because his great ambition to be a writer and
it's
to get
a yellow face. It's almost like a yellow face scenario, isn't it? Sorry, Essie, we're almost running out of time, and that's why I'm cutting you short. We'll have another talk when Dangerous is out, because it sounds utterly fascinating.
Lovely. That would be lovely.
I love that story. But now you have to help me, because we're coming to our 5 faves, please. Very quickly, no thinking, one word answers. Okay, those are the rules. What's your favorite film?
Do you know, my very favorite film is The Godfather.
Excellent. Favorite book?
My favorite book is, at the moment, oh, this changes so much, but Oh gosh, this is a really hard one, you know, because I have so many. But I'm going to say The Vampire at the moment, not because I think it's the best book that's ever written, but because I've been reading it to do research. No, I'm going to change my mind completely. Wuthering Heights.
Wuthering Heights, that's a nice
Yeah.
classic. Any favorite song, music, score, composition?
Well, again, that changes all the time. But at the moment, I went to a fabulous concert last weekend, and the music was by a Scottish composer called Erland Cooper. And it was such an interesting concept because he's based a whole album on a tape which he recorded digitally, then put onto actual tape, buried it in the ground in the Isle of Orkney, and then dug it up to see what remained after 3 years and what it sounded like. And the
I
concert I
love it.
went to was that. And it was amazing, absolutely amazing. And Erlen Cooper's music is stunningly beautiful. I do recommend people look him
I'll
up.
I'll look him up and I'll listen in.
I'll
And what's
send
your
you a
favorite?
link.
What's your favorite food?
My favorite food is sushi.
Lovely. And your favorite travel destination?
Venice, of course.
Well, there you go. There you go. And here we come to the end of Everything All Right already. Our guest today was Essie Fox, who spoke about her beautiful novel Fascination, amongst many, many other things. The paperback of Fascination is out now. Go order it online or buy it at your local independent bookstore. My name is Ellen Alpsten. You're watching Everything All Right. And please tune in next week. Thank you so much, Essie.
Oh, thank you, Ellen. That was just lovely. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Bye bye.